This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Rabbi say, a good year. So the Mishnah tells us in Masechta Rosh Hashanah that the 15th day of Shvat is considered a Rosh Hashanah. What is it a Rosh Hashanah for? Says the Mishnah, Masechta Rosh Hashanah, and Daf Beis Amud Aleph. It's Rosh Hashanah La'ilan. It's a Rosh Hashanah for trees. Actually, if you look in the Mishnah, Masechta Rosh Hashanah, Daf Beis Amud Aleph, it's machlokes. There are two opinions as to when is the new year for trees. Beis Shammai says, B'yechad b'Shvat Rosh Hashanah La'ilan, Kedivrei Beis Shammai. The first day of Shvat, Beis Shammai says, is Rosh Hashanah for trees. Beis Hillel Oimrim, B'chamisha Asar Bai. Beis Hillel says, on the 15th day of Shvat. So we have a classic machlokes Tanoim. When is Rosh Hashanah for trees? Is it Rosh Chodesh Shvat, or is it Tu B'Shvat? So you're all wondering about the following issue, and that is, what difference does it make when is the Rosh Hashanah for trees? Who cares when the new year for trees is? What, you're going to send the tree a happy birthday card? What are you going to do with the tree exactly? You're going to dance with the tree, you're going to take pictures of it. What significance is there? What halachic significance is there that Tu B'Shvat, or according to Beis Shammai, the first day of Shvat, is the Rosh Hashanah for trees? So, you'll be very surprised to learn that Tu B'Shvat is not a day of judgment. It's not a Yom Adin. Many people mistakenly think that on Tu B'Shvat, Hashem judges the trees. Says Rabbi Vadia Yosef, you can look in his Sfarim, it is a grave error. Trees are judged on Shavuos. So what happens on Tu B'Shvat? There is no judgment for trees. But you take a look at Rashi, take a look at number 2. La'ilan, La'inyan, Ma'aser, regarding a tithe. Any Levim over here? Yeah? Oh, Gabriel. So we know, if let's say you're a farmer, Daniel Ari Harris, no? Let's say you were a farmer and you had a lot of produce. So the halacha was, when we had Kedushas Haaretz, you have to give 10% of your crop to your local Levi. Okay? Now, the way it works is like this. You can't just in one shot, let's say you work for 10 years, you have thousands of bushels of grain. So now you want to say, I'm going to take Meiser 10% of all the grain I produced over the last 10 years. No, it doesn't work that way. Every year is a separate cheshbon. Every year's produce has to be tithed separately. By the way, it's the same thing with Meiser on money. You don't just, let's say, oh, I worked for the last 10 years, I made $10 million. Now I'll give $1 million. No, every year Meiser is a new cheshbon, is a new calculation. So when it comes to Meiser, so every year you have to take 10% and you bring it to the Levi. When is the new year for Meiser? In other words, how do we demarcate? How do we know the point in the time where until this day it was last year, and from this day and on, it's next year? Is it Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Tishrei? Is it Aleph Nisan? What is the line of demarcation with which we determine that before this date it was last year's crop, and from this date and on, it's next year's crop? So Rashi tells us, the new year for Hilchos Maaser is Tu B'Shvat. In other words, anything that blossomed before Tu B'Shvat, that's last year's fruit. Anything that blossoms after Tu B'Shvat is this year's fruit. So to me, it does not sound like the most exciting Yom Tov, right? It doesn't sound too exciting. It's just basically a legal day to determine when do you give 10% from last year's crop? When do you give 10%? What is so happy about Tu B'Shvat? Why is Tu B'Shvat a Yom Tov? So you know what the answer is? You look in the Gemara, nowhere in the Gemara does the Gemara say it is a Yom Tov. Maybe it's not a Yom Tov. Does the Gemara say it's a Yom Tov? All the Gemara is telling us, all the Mishnah is telling us, is that on Tu B'Shvat, it's the demarcation for the new year of Meiser. Maybe it's not a Yom Tov. Where do we find in any classic sources that Tu B'Shvat is a happy day? So you look in number 3, you look in the Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Kuf Lamed Aleph. Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Lamed Aleph Sif Vav says the following: there's a minhag not to say Tachnun on Tu B'Av or on Tu B'Shvat. You hear this custom? There's a custom not to say Tachnun, not on Tu B'Av and not on Tu B'Shvat. So we are encountering, Rabbi Sai, for the very first time, that Tu B'Shvat is not merely a legal day, but there's something happy about it. Where do we see there's something happy about it? From the fact that we don't say tachnan. Otherwise, if you would have asked me, just because it's a legal day, why does that make it a happy occasion? I'll give you an example. In halacha, there are 3 stages in the development of a woman. Until a woman is 12 years old, she's called a katana. From 12 to 12 and a half, she's called a nara. And from 12 and a half and up, she is a bogeres. Is there any concept in halacha that when a woman becomes 12 and a half years old, happy bogeres day, you reached bogeres, now you're a bogeres, you're 12 and a half. So first, for certain halachas, now you meet the requirement. Of course not. Just because you meet a certain halachic deadline, it's not a cause for celebration. And yet, Rabbi Isai, we're finding that in the Shulchan Aruch, there is an inyan, there is an idea, there is a reason to avoid saying tachnon on Tu B'Shvat. And the question is why? Why? So let me share with you the following comment of the Vilna Gaon, and I'm not 100% sure what the Vilna Gaon means. You take a look at number 4. Says the Gra, I just want to ask everybody, there's no conversation at all in here. All conversation has to be outside. Thank you very much. Says the Gra says the following. Why don't we say Tachnon on Tu B'Shvat? So says the Gaon, Shehu Rosh Hashanah Lo Ilanois. Tu B'Shvat is a Rosh Hashanah for trees. Okay? Ukemoi Kol Dalid Rosh Hashanah Shehein Yom Tov. The same way all 4 Rosh Hashanahs are Yom Tov, so too Tu B'Shvat is a Yom Tov. What does the Vilna Gaon mean? What do you mean just like all 4 Rosh Hashanahs are a Yom Tov? Just to get clear, there are 2 Mishnayos in the Masechta Rosh Hashanah. One Mishnah says there are 4 Rosh Hashanahs, and let me tell you what the 4 Rosh Hashanahs are. The first day of Nisan is the first day of the year for kings and for Yomim Tovim. Which means when a king is writing what year of his reign it is, he starts with Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So Rosh Chodesh Nisan is a Yom Tov for kings. Rosh Chodesh Elul is Rosh Hashanah for Maser Behema. Rosh Chodesh Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for Shemitah and Yovel. So what's the Vilna Gaon saying? The same way the other 3 Rosh Hashanahs are a Yom Tov, Tu B'Shvat is also a Yom Tov. The other 3 Rosh Hashanahs are not a Yom Tov. Rosh Chodesh Elul is not a Yom Tov. Rosh Chodesh Tishrei happens to be a Yom Tov, but not because it's a Rosh Hashanah for Shemitah. It's because it happens to be a Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah. So what exactly does the Vilna Gaon mean? Just like the other 4 Rosh Hashanahs are a Yom Tov, so this is also a Yom Tov. It's not true. The other Rosh Hashanahs are not Yomim Tovim. Do you know anybody who celebrates Rosh Chodesh Elul as a Yom Tov? Unless the Vilna Gaon means, just like the other 3 dates you don't say Tachnon, so too on Tu B'Shvat you don't say Tachnon. Well, the other dates you don't say Tachnon because they're all on Rosh Chodesh. That's why you don't say Tachnon. So it's a very mysterious comment of the Vilna Gaon. But I would like to share with you, for the opening segment of the Shiur, a comment of the Aderes. Who's the Aderes? The Aderes is Rabbi Eliyahu, David, Rabinowitz, Te'umim. Anybody ever hear of the Aderes? Rabbi Eliyahu, David, Rabinowitz, Te'umim. He's the father-in-law of Rav Kook. Rav Yitzchak HaKohen and Kook. The Aderes was his father-in-law. The Aderes was a Goyin Olam. From the time he was 13 years old, he was already writing many, many Svarim. He lived a very, very sad life. Aderes lost his mother at the age of 5. And he writes he had a very lonely and sad childhood. But already from a very young age, he was mamish a baki b'chol ha'Torah kula. In fact, when he was appointed to his first position as the Rav of Panovich, in his early 30s, the people said, okay, he's worthy for the job, but we never, in the history of Klal Yisrael, had a Rav so young. But he was able to fill the position. The Aderes' youngest daughter passed away. His oldest daughter passed away. The Aderes gets word from Rav Shmuel of Salant. Rav Shmuel of Salant was the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. He was a man already in his 90s. And he's worried that after him, who's going to take over as chief rabbi? Now in those days, being chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, it's not like the chief rabbinate today. Chief rabbi meant, you are the acknowledged greatest individual in learning Torah. Not you're the best speaker. Not, you have, the nicest beard. Chief rabbi meant you're the Gadol Hadar. Especially in Yerushalayim. Especially in Yerushalayim where it was people, all Chachamim, Rabbanim, Rav Shmuel Salant needed to groom the next person for the job. So he writes a letter to the Gadol Hadar at the time. Who's the Gadol Hadar? Chaim Ozer Grzinski. He says, who's the next man for the job? I'm going to bring him in, I'm going to groom him for the position, and then, Lachameh Besam Shana, he's going to take over. Rav Chaim Ozer says, the Aderes, get the Aderes. Chafetz Chaim wrote tremendous things about the Aderes. By the way, his name was, again, Reb Eliyahu, David, Rabinowitz, Te'umim. Why is he called Te'umim? He had a twin brother, Tzvi. He was born on Shavuos together with his twin brother, Te'umim. Rabbi Taitz's shul, right here, right in the neighborhood, is called Aderes Eliyahu. Rabbi Taitz was a descendant of the Aderes. How did he get the name Taitz if the Aderes' last name is Rabinowitz? You ready for this story? The original mother of a boy, they were living in a city where the parents were always afraid that the children would be drafted into the army. So there's a young boy who passed away. His last name was Taitz. So the mother said, if I name my kid the last name Taitz, then on record my son will be recorded as dead. So she gave her kid, whose last name was Rabinowitz, the last name Taitz, so that officially, legally, he would be considered dead, and that's how he avoided the army. Anyway, says the Aderes, he says, my whole life, I never understood. What is everyone so happy about on Tu B'Shvat? Oh, it's such a happy day because last week's apples were from last year and today's apples are from next year. I mean, who cares? It's just a technical holiday. You want to know, when do you start the new year for Meiser? It's just, does anybody celebrate April 15th? Because it's a new tax season. I mean, that's what Tu B'Shvat is. Tu B'Shvat is the Jewish tax season. Right? Why would anybody celebrate Tu B'Shvat? Well, what's so happy? Oh, now I have to give another 10% to the Levi. I mean, I'd rather keep it for myself. Well, what are people so happy about? So says the Aderes, in my mind, you know why in the Shulchan Aruch they say not to say Tachnun? You know what we're so happy about on Tu B'Shvat? Because once upon a time, there was a mitzvah of Maser, where you had to give 10% of your produce to the Levi. And unfortunately nowadays, nobody really knows too much about that mitzvah. So the mitzvah is going to be forgotten. Nobody's ever going to remember the mitzvah of Meiser on your produce. So you know what the Chachamim did? They said, since Tu B'Shvat is the day in the calendar, which marks the new year for Meiser, we're going to make a Yom Tif out of it to remind people that there's such a thing as Meiser. And therefore, says the Aderes, you know what I do on Tu B'Shvat? I don't eat cherries, and I don't eat pears, and I don't eat apples, and I don't eat raisins, I don't eat fruits. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. You know what I do, he says? I learn the halachos of Eretz Yisrael on Tu B'Shvat. I learn the halachos that are dependent on the land. When to give Meiser, when to give Truma, when Hilchos Shmita, Hilchos Yovel. Rabbi said, did you know that there are certain halachos of the Eretz, of the land, that are applicable in America? If you, let's say, plant a tree in your backyard, you know that the first 3 years, you can't eat the fruit? Arla. Say, Arla? I thought Arla is only in Eretz Yisrael. No. Halacha l'Moshe Misinai, Arla applies in Chutz La'aretz. You know that? If you plant a tree and it grows fruits, you cannot eat the fruits for the first 3 years, and the 4th year is Neter Ravai. It's halacha l'Moshe Misinai. So who's going to remember these halachas? Somebody called me last year. He bought a tree. You'll say, anyway, a plant doesn't grow fruits in the first 3 years. It takes time till the tree grows. By that time, it's already past the 4th year. Someone called me a year and a half ago. They bought a tree in Home Depot. So the tree was already 5 years old. It was a fruit tree. Then they replanted it. So it's producing fruits right away. You can't eat the fruit. It's Arla. It could be an Isser Dairaisa. People have to know this. You can't wear shatnez. You can't eat treif. You can't eat the fruits of a tree the first 3 years. Right? Maybe when you replant it, the shot clock starts again. You know, the shot clock starts again. So it's a big shaila in halacha. So therefore, says the Aderes, what's Tu B'Shvat? Since it's the demarcation for Meiser, Chazal made it into a Yom Tif in order, everybody gets together, we eat fruits, and then we say, what are we doing? Why are we eating fruits? So one reason is we're happy that Rabbi Yaakov Shaulov is with us, right? But besides that, it's a Sudas Hodah, we're eating fruits to remember there's a mitzvah of Meiser, there's a mitzvah of Truma, there's a mitzvah of Shemitah. It's like Zeicher LeMikdash. So I just want to start off by speaking out one very interesting issue about Tu B'Shvat, a halachic issue, and then we'll get to more of the mystical aspects of fruits. And that is, why did Chazal pick Tu B'Shvat as a new year for fruits? You see anybody planting fruits today on Tu B'Shvat, in the middle of the winter? No, nobody's planting. Even in Eretz Yisrael, nobody's planting today. Is anything growing now? Nothing's growing. It's dead winter. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's no man's land. Why would we pick Tu B'Shvat as a new year for fruits? Says the Gemara, look at number 6. My taima, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Oishia, Hayel v'yatzu roiv gishmei shana. At Tu B'Shvat, the most of the rain has fallen for the year. Most of the rain has fallen by Tu B'Shvat. Because Cheshvan is a very rainy season. Kislev is very rainy. Teves is very rainy. When you get to Tu B'Shvat, most of the rain of the year has fallen. So you say, who cares? What does that have to do with the new year for crop? Says Rashi, listen to this. What is the first stage of a fruit? So you say, maybe when the flower comes, when the fruit begins to ripen. Says Rashi, the first stage of a fruit is when the sap of the tree begins going up the bark. When the sap of the tree begins going up the bark, that sap is going to turn into the juice of the fruit, and the fruit is going to start to ripen. You know what happens on Tu B'Shvat, says Rashi? Since most of the rain of the year has already fallen, if you were to stick, a needle into the tree, stick the needle in, and you pull back, that is when you'll start to get the juice out of the tree. You go up to New England, you take a nail, you knock it into the maple tree. Tu B'Shvat, at least in Eretz Yisrael, you go to New England, you knock the nail in the tree, it will start oozing with sap. In Iran also, that's what they used to do. I wasn't there, but I'm told by my spies that that's what they used to do. In Eretz Yisrael, the sap in the tree begins to rise in the center of the tree on Tu B'Shvat, and that is what allows the fruit to flourish. So if you wanted to know, it's freezing outside, it's dead winter, is there any life at all? Tu B'Shvat, even though we can't see it with the naked eye, if you were to be in the center of the tree, you would see the tree is coming alive on Tu B'Shvat. So according to Rashi, Tu B'Shvat is the objective birthday of the tree. That is when the tree becomes alive. But if you look in Tosfos says a different explanation for Tu B'Shvat, and it changes everything. Okay? And this is going to bring us to Tu B'Shvat in Argentina. Okay? Very important shaila. Tu B'Shvat in Argentina. I know you're all wondering today, what's Tu B'Shvat in Argentina? I'm going to tell you. Says Tosfos, Tu B'Shvat is not the Yom Tif of trees because that's the day that the sap starts to go up. No. You know what the real Yom Tif for trees is? Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Tishrei. So then why does the Mishnah say Tu B'Shvat? Says Tosfos, listen carefully. Whatever fruit grew from Tavshin Ayin Daled's reign, starting from Rosh Hashanah, is a Tavshin Ayin Daled fruit. Whatever fruit grew from Tavshin Ayin Gimel's reign is a Tavshin Ayin Gimel fruit. How am I supposed to know when I go to the store, when I look at an apple? It's a good thing I even know what an apple is. But I look at the apple, or the orange. How am I supposed to know what reign it grew from? Tavshin Ayin Dalet, Tavshin Ayin Gimel. How am I supposed to know? There's like a sticker on it that says this fruit grew from Tavshin. How are you supposed to know? Says Tosfos, if it began to blossom after Tu B'Shvat, then we knew it grew from the rain of Tavshin Ayin Dalet after Tishrei. If it began to blossom before Tu B'Shvat, then it grew from Tavshin Ayin Gimel's reign. In other words, the definition of a 5774 fruit is whatever grew from this year's rain. A definition of 5773 fruit is what grew from last year's rain. But how do you know what rain it grew from? whatever flourishes after Tu B'Shvat is from the rain after this Tishrei. Whatever flourished before Tu B'Shvat is from the rain before this Tishrei. So you say, what difference does it make if you learn like Rashi or you learn like Tosfos? Again, Rashi learns Tu B'Shvat is the objective birthday of the tree. On Tu B'Shvat, the sap goes up. That's the new year for the tree. Tosfos says no. Whatever grew from the rain after Tishrei is from this year. How do you know what grew from the rain after Tishrei? Whatever flourishes after Tu B'Shvat. This is a classic machlokes in what we call siman and siba. Is it a cause or is it an effect? I'll give you an example. You have a guy, he says he's not feeling well. So you're not feeling well, right? The kid goes to the teacher. Teacher, I got to go home. I'm not feeling well. Teacher says, really? What's wrong? So if you're smart, this is a good trick. Always say you have a stomach ache, because there's no way he could ever disprove you. Right? A stomach ache, what's he going to tell you? No, you don't have a stomach ache. You say you have a stomach ache. Right? A smart kid knows you always go with the stomach ache. But if you say, no, I have an infection. So the teacher says, do you have fever? So now you're in trouble. Now you better have fever. Right? So the teacher takes the temperature, 102. Does 102 by definition mean you're sick? Or is that only symptomatic of the fact that you have an illness? Fever is not illness. Fever is just a way to see, it's the barometer. It's the way to detect if you have the infection. Rashi learns, now what does that have to do with Tu B'Shvat? Rashi learns that Tu B'Shvat is the cause of the new year. On Tu B'Shvat, the sap starts to go up in the tree. That is the objective new year. Tosfos learns no. Tu B'Shvat is only symptomatic of the fact that this fruit grew from the rain of Tafshin Ayin Daled. What difference does it make? Tu B'Shvat in Argentina. You ready for this question? We just learned that the first 3 years of a tree, even in Chutz La'aretz, you're not allowed to eat the fruit. What is it? Arla. When is year 1 over for Arla? When is year 2 over for Arla? When is year 3? Tu B'Shvat. It's the new year for trees. But I have just one point. In Argentina, the rainy season is not from Tishrei until Shvat. It's much earlier in the year. In Argentina, the sap doesn't start going up the tree on Tu B'Shvat. It starts going up the tree 6 months earlier. So maybe in Argentina, the new year is not on Tu B'Shvat. The new year is when the sap starts going up the tree in Argentina. In other words, if you live in the southern hemisphere, the trees and the rain and the whole cycle does not follow the cycle that it does in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, the rainy season is from Tishrei to Shvat. Shvat, the tree starts getting heated up. The sap starts going up. And that's the beginning of the year for the tree. But in Argentina, it starts much earlier. So maybe you'll say the new year for trees in Argentina is when the sap starts going up.
Pesach Chodesh Aviv is also...
Okay, Pesach Chodesh Aviv is that's in the Torah. But here the Torah doesn't tell us the new year. The Chachamim are choosing it based on the beginning. So maybe in other climates it would be different. So what would you say the halacha is? It should be a machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos. According to Rashi, where Tu B'Shvat is the new year. Why? Because that's when the sap starts going up the tree. So if you go to Argentina and you see there the sap starts going up the tree Tu B'Av, maybe that should be the new year for the tree in Argentina. But according to Tosfos, where Tu B'Shvat is merely the barometer. That if it grew after Tu B'Shvat, it's from this year's rain. If it grew before Tu B'Shvat, it's from last year's rain. It doesn't rain in Argentina between Tishrei and Shvat. So whatever grows after Shvat, after Tu B'Shvat, is certainly from this year's rain. Because there was no rain earlier. There was no rain between Tishrei and earlier. In other words, according to Tosfos, where Tu B'Shvat is merely the barometer to know whether it grew from this year's rain or last year's rain. So then we could says, this is the question of Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank says, Tzvi was a Rav in Yerushalayim, he says, this machlokes, Rashi and Tosfos, would make a difference in other climates. If you learn like Rashi, where Tu B'Shvat is the day the sap starts going up the tree, so in other climates where the sap starts going up the tree earlier, the new year would be earlier. But if you learn that Tu B'Shvat is merely a barometer to know that it grew from this year's rain, So in other climates where it's not even raining between Tishrei and Shvat, so if it grew after Shvat, it's certainly from this year. It wasn't from last year. Wasn't from last year. So now that's a big question. What is the halacha about Tu B'Shvat in other climates? It would come out, it should be a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. It says of Tzvi Pesach Frank, if you look in the commentators on the Shulchan Aruch, do they paskin like Rashi or do they paskin like Tosfos? If you look in the Shach, you can take a look on your sheets over here. The Shach in Yerodei Siman Reish Sadi Daled, the Taz in Sivkat and Ches, the Shach and the Taz both write like Tosfos and like the Ran, that Tu B'Shvat is not the inherent Rosh Hashanah for trees. It's merely the barometer to know when the tree grew. Did it grow from this year's rain or last year's rain? And according to Tosfos, if it's Tu B'Shvat in Eretz Yisrael, it's certainly Tu B'Shvat in Argentina. But then, says Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, what about according to the opinion of Rashi? Rashi says it's Tu B'Shvat because that's the day the sap starts going up the tree. So maybe in Argentina where it starts growing up the tree earlier, it will be a different date. So he says the following very interesting halacha. He quotes his grandson-in-law. Who is Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank's grandson-in-law? Rav Yosef Cohen. Rav Yosef Cohen, when I was learning in Eretz Yisrael, I had the zchus to hear a shiur from Rav Yosef Cohen. He was on the Beis Din Haggadah of Yerushalayim, together with Rabbi Yashiv and Rabbi Vadi Yosef. So you can imagine he was a big gun. His son is Rabbi David Cohen, Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron today. So Rabbi Yosef Cohen said the following. Let's say, when do we start to ask for rain? By the rainy season, right? December 4th, December 5th. But what do you mean? We need the rain much earlier. No. It doesn't matter when we need the rain. It all goes by Eretz Yisrael. The whole world gets dragged along to Eretz Yisrael. Every country in the world is subsidiary to Eretz Yisrael. In fact, when the Rush ran away to Spain, it's very interesting. The Rush was the primary disciple of Marami Rothenberg. So Marami Rothenberg, we know, was imprisoned, and they did not let the remains of the Marami Rothenberg out except for an exorbitant ransom, right? And the Rush, who was a student of Marami Rothenberg, he figured he's next. So he runs away to Spain. Now the Rush is an Ashkenazi. Yeah? In Spain, there are no Ashkenazim in Spain. They're all Sephardim. But the Sephardim, they know how to honor their rabbis. So the Rush comes to Spain. All the Sephardim in Spain, they honor the Rush. The Rush never saw such honor before. So the Rush says, you know what? While I'm at it, let me get the Sephardim to change their customs. So they told him, that much we're not going to honor you, right? The Rush tried to get the Sephardim in Spain. In Spain, they need rain in the summer. So he wanted to be Masakin that we should daven the same Talumat Levracha in the summer. So the Sephardim said, no, we don't do that. Everything follows Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, they only need rain in the rainy season. We're not going to change it here. So we see from there that all the world is subsidiary to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, when it comes to Hilchos Arla, there's a Mishnah in Arla, Perek Gimel, that says like this. In Eretz Yisrael, Arla is D'oraisa. In Chutz La'aretz, it's Halacha. What does Halacha mean? There are three opinions in the Rishonim. You have the opinion of the Rashba. Halacha means it's just a minhag. Halacha Medini. It's a minhag. So it's just a minhag. If Arla is D'oraisa in Eretz Yisrael, and in Chutz La'aretz it's only a minhag, so certainly, if Tu B'Shvat is the deadline for Arla in Eretz Yisrael, Chutz La'aretz is subsidiary in Hilchos Arla to Eretz Yisrael. But the Rambam doesn't learn like that. The Rambam learns when we say there's Arla and Chutz La'aretz is halacha, the Rambam learns it means halacha l'Moshe miSinai. But even so, says Rabbi Yosef Cohen, it still means that Chutz La'aretz is subsidiary to Arla to Eretz Yisrael. Because in Eretz Yisrael it's D'oraisa, and in Chutz La'aretz it's halacha l'Moshe miSinai. It's like a lower class. And even those Rishonim who learn that it's D'oraisa and Chutz La'aretz, right? You didn't think a Shiur on Tu B'Shvat could be so complicated, right? Even if you learn, like those Rishonim, like the Bahag and the Shiltas, that Arla in Chutz La'aretz is D'oraisa through Halacha L'Mishum Sinai, but since it's an extension of Arla and Eretz Yisrael, Chutz La'aretz is considered secondary to Eretz Yisrael, and therefore whatever is the new year for fruits in Eretz Yisrael is the new year for fruits in Chutz La'aretz. It doesn't matter what climate you're in. So bottom line, Halacha L'Maisa, Tu B'Shvat is the new year for fruits, for Meiser, for Arla, not only in Eretz Yisrael, for America, for South America, for every continent in the world. Okay? That's the bottom line. Rabbi say, we move on to the next topic of the Shiur, a little bit more mystical. Right? People like the mystical stuff. Okay. It's brought down in the Sefer, Tikkun Yisachar, a very rare Sefer. He says the following. Look at number 13. V'ho Ashkenazim noagim leharbois boy b'minei peiros ilanos. Ashkenazim have a custom to eat a lot of fruits on Tu B'Shvat. Not the Sfardim. Only the Ashkenazim. Only the Ashkenazim. That's what Tikkun Yisachar and the Magen Avram brings it down, lahalacha. Look at number 14. Tu B'Shvat, Rosh Hashanah li'ilanos, v'noyagin ho Ashkenazim laharbois b'minei peiros ilanos. The Ashkenazim have a lot of fruits. Comes along a Gadol Yisrael. I don't believe we ever quoted him before. Reb Leibela Eger. Who's Reb Leibela Eger? Reb Leibela Eger was the son of Reb Shlomo Eger. Who is Reb Shlomo Eger? Reb Shlomo Eger was the son of Rabbi Akiva Eger. Rabbi Akiva Eger was the Gadol Hadar. Rabbi Akiva Eger was the father-in-law of the Chassam Sofer. The greatest Anav, the greatest Baal Halacha, the greatest Lamdan and Adar. Rabbi Akiva Eger. Rabbi Akiva Eger had a son, Rav Shlomo Eger, the Gilyonei Hashas. The Gilyon Marsha. The Gilyon Marsha on Shulchan Aruch. Rav Shlomo Eger. They were both purebred Litvaks. Rav Shlomo Eger had a son, Reb Leibela Eger. Reb Leibela Eger was growing up as a very nice boy. But then he got attracted to the Kotzker Rebbe. And he converted. He converted to become Chasidi. Whereupon Reb Shlomo Eger sat Shiva for his son. Reb Shlomo Eger sat be'avelos, 7 days of avelos. Literally, not figuratively. Literally, it was like converting to... It's well known. It's well known. Reb Shlomo Eger now... Reb Leibela Eger goes on, he becomes a great Rebbe, he has thousands of followers. Thousands of followers. It was amazing, there was a very famous story that happened, where there was a bris milah, and Reb Leibela Eger, as being a chassid as he was, he did a lot of hachanos for his tefillah, a lot of preparation, and we know bris milah is supposed to be done first thing in the morning, zrizim makdim lemitzvos, and Reb Leibela Eger said, wait, postpone the bris milah, I have to go to the mikvah, I have to prepare, hachanos, and this caused one of the biggest controversies in Europe. To push off a bris milah for hachanos. Who comes to the defense of Reb Leibela Eger? Chidushei Harem. Who else? Reb Tzadok HaKohen. Who else? His cousin, Reb Shimon Sofer, one of the big Rabbanim, who was not on his side in the Misnaged Chasidi issue. Reb Shimon Sofer came to this. It is a very major episode in European history. But in any event, Reb Leibela Eger asked the following question. Tu B'Shvat is what? The new year of fruits. So he says, what kind of chacham from the Manashtana? What kind of... It's like from the Chachmei Chelm. What are we doing? We're taking fruits. Right? We have a cherry over here, a grape. When is this grape from? It's this year's crop? Really, the grape grew. You planted, harvested this grape just in one night? Of course not. It's last year's crop. So what in the world are you doing eating last year's fruit on Tu B'Shvat in the new year? I mean, Tu B'Shvat is marking the new year of fruits. What are you doing eating last year's fruits? It's like from Chelm. That's what they did in Chelm. Right? When they wanted, they went to the store in Chelm. This is how they went shopping. Right? They bought new milk. Right? They would buy the new milk. And then they would drink the old milk in the fridge once it's expired. And then they would wait for their new milk to expire. And then they would go buy shopping the new milk in the store. And right, that's how they shopped. They always ate something that was bad. So what are we doing? We wait till Tu B'Shvat to eat the new fruits. You want to eat fruits? You know what the custom should be? The custom should be that the day before Tu B'Shvat, last year's, the last day of last year's fruit, that's when you should eat the fruits. Because it's last year's fruits. Tu B'Shvat, you shouldn't eat fruits, because there are no fruits yet of the new year. So B'Lev asks, what are we doing? Everyone's making a whole big thing, and now it's a whole Seder, and some eat 15 fruits, it's really 30 fruits. Look in the Chesed Avram, and others say, no, right, it's from the Sefer Chemdas Yomim. Was he a follower of Shabtai Tzvi? Was he not? Stay tuned next year, share on Tu B'Shvat. But what's the whole thing? 30 fruits, 15 fruits. What are you eating fruits for? It's this year. There are no fruits yet this year. You should be eating the fruits yesterday, not today. Says the B'Lev Eger, an amazing thing. The Gemara says in Masechta Brachos, Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis. Amar Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa, number 16. Kol hanene min ha'olam hazeh b'lei bracha. Anyone who gets benefit in this world without a blessing, kilu goizel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're stealing from God, v'goizel Knesset Yisrael. You're stealing from Klal Yisrael. What are you stealing? So says Rashi, take a look, turn over, number 17. You're stealing from the Ribono Shel Olam, the bracha, and you're stealing from Klal Yisrael, a big thing. Because if you don't make a bracha on fruit, the fruits will not be successful. The fruits are going to get beaten. The fruits are going to get attacked. The fruits will not have a matzliach dik a year. They're not going to have atzlach. If you don't make a bracha on food properly, you're causing harm to Klal Yisrael. So says Rabbi Eger, what do we do on Tu B'Shvat? Tu B'Shvat marks the new crop of fruit. So we take fruits, we make a bracha, because if not making a bracha causes fruits to be unsuccessful, then making a bracha will give bracha v'atzlacha to the new crop, and this is a good way, an appropriate way to start the new year of fruits. Which brings us to a very interesting thing. You eat a piece of cake, you eat fruit from the Shivas Haminim. What bracha achrona do you make? You break bracha achas mein shalosh, right? You make an ala michya, or ala gefen ve'al priya gefen, al ho'etz ve'al priya etz. In this bracha, we say one of the most queerest things you'll ever find. We say Ribono Shel Olam. Uvenei Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh B'mhera V'yameinu. Build Yerushalayim. So if you were to ask me, why do we want Yerushalayim to be built? We want to go to the Beis HaMikdash. We want to bring karbanos. We want to learn from the Chachmei Yerushalayim. We want to learn from the Beis HaMikdash. But that's not what we ask for. We say, Ribono Shel Olam, build the Beis HaMikdash. We're going to go up into it, V'haleinu l'soicha. V'samcheinu b'vinyana, we're going to rejoice in the building of the Beis HaMikdash. You know why? V'noichal mipirya, so we could eat an apple, so we could eat a pear. That's what we're really yearning for. We want Mashiach now, so why? So we could eat fruits. Right? It's like a message from the Food and Drug Administration in the Ala Michya. It's like they paid for advertisement. Have 9 fruits a day. So, how are we going to convince Jews to eat 9 fruits a day? So we're going to stick into Ala Michya. Ribono Shel Olam, rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Why? So we can eat fruits? That's why we want to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash? So we can eat fruits? What do fruits have to do with rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash? And therefore Rabbeinu Yonah says, these words are so illogical, don't say them. The Torah brings down from Rabbeinu Yonah, take a look at number 18. Don't say, Hashem, rebuild the Beis HaMikdash so we can eat fruits and fill our stomachs. Right? V'noichal mipirya v'nizva mitu. Well, what kind of tefillah is that? You want to say rebuild the Beis HaMikdash so we could bring karbanos, so that we could duchen, so that we could be oilei regal. That's beautiful. Banisham, build the Beis HaMikdash. Why? So we could eat fruits? However, the Torah brings down, the Bahag said you should say it. But the Torah says, my father, the Rosh, would not say in Ala Michya, v'noichal mipirya. Comes along Maran Bet Yosef. Beis Yosef says, no, you should say it. Why? Says the Beis Yosef, you have to read the words carefully. You know why we're davening to Hashem that we should eat fruits? It's not that we're hungry for fruits. It's not that we need a cherry that badly. We need a mango. You know why we're davening for fruits? Because v'noichal mipirya, v'nizba mituva, what are the next words? U'nevarechecha aleh b'kedusha avtara. We say, Banisham, bring us to Yerushalayim. We'll eat the fruits. We'll make a bracha. What we're davening for is, we want to be able to make a bracha. Why do we want to make a bracha so bad? If you don't have fruits, you don't have to make a bracha. We're davening to Hashem. Hashem, give us fruits so we could make a bracha. So don't make the bracha and don't eat the fruits. What's the beginning of making the bracha? So very important to know. We have over here two statements from the Arizal. One in number 20 from the Shar HaMitzvos, Reb Chaim Vital, and one quoted by the Kaf HaChaim. The Arizal told his student Reb Chaim Vital, you want to get Ruach HaKodesh, right? You want God to communicate with you? Where does Ruach HaKodesh come from? So we would say, Ruach HaKodesh, you have to fast, you have to learn Torah, you have to go to the mikvah. No, you know where Ruach HaKodesh comes from? When you make a bracha on food with kavanah. The Arizal told Reb Chaim Vital, take a look at number 21, on the second line. Iker hasagas ha'adam el ruach hakodesh. The main way of achieving holiness, the divine spirit, tluya al yedei kavanas ha'adam, is dependent on a person's kavanah, uzehirus b'chol birchas hanenin, and being careful when you make a bracha on food. You could daven well, you could learn well, you could go to the mikvah. If when you eat, you mumble your brachos, you're not going to attain Kedusha. Kedusha is attained by making the proper brachos on food. And the Arizal explained that all food, especially French fries, has a lot of bad stuff in it, right? It has not only things that are going to clog your arteries, it also has tumah. So when you make a bracha, you remove the tumah, but when you remove the tumah from the French fries, you also remove the tumah from you. So that sanctifies a person. That's the best way to have Ruach HaKodesh. So when you go home tonight, you want to try it. I have no guarantees, but this is the only way to get it. You have to make brachos on food properly. So therefore now we understand. We say, Ribbanu Shalom. You know why we want you to build Yerushalayim? So that we could go there. We could eat the fruits, make a bracha, get Ruach HaKodesh, and then connect to you in Yerushalayim. Still a little hard to understand, because you can make brachas anywhere. You don't have to be in Eretz Yisrael to make brachas. You can make brachas in Argentina. You can make brachas here in the shul. What are we davening for? We're saying, Ribbanu Shalom, build the Beis HaMikdash, so I can eat fruits, so I can make brachas and get ruach. I could do that anywhere. Says the Bach, a davar nifla ma'ayro, a wondrous thing. Says the Bach, how does a person get Kedushas Eretz Yisrael? How do you get the Kedusha? You step on the ground. The soil is not going through your skin into your body. How do you get Kedushas Eretz Yisrael? Says the Bach, you should know that the Ribbanu Shalom dwells in Eretz Yisrael. So what does that do with me? I don't get the Kedusha of my neighbor just because he lives next to me. So how are you going to get the Kedusha of God who dwells in Eretz Yisrael? Well, the Ribbanu Shalom is in Eretz Yisrael, and that sanctifies the fruits. And then when you ingest the fruits, you're ingesting the Kedusha of the Ribbanu Shalom. There is no greater way to elevate your body than to ingest the fruits of Eretz Yisrael. Because it's the one thing we have. You see, where does the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael come from? God lives in Eretz Yisrael. The land has Kedusha. The land produces holy peros. When you eat those fruits, it elevates you more than anything else in this world. That's why Chazal say Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael to enjoy the fruits. Well, Moshe Rabbeinu liked cherries? No! By ingesting the fruits, you ingest Kedushas Haaretz, Kedushas HaShechina. But, says the Bach, when a person sins in Eretz Yisrael, God leaves the land. Once God leaves the land, you cause the land to become tameh. Once you cause the land to become tameh, the fruits become tameh. Once the fruits become tameh, you become tameh. That's why the Chassam Sofer writes, the biggest tzaddikim in the world are in Eretz Yisrael, and the biggest rishoyim in the world are in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, either you're a big tzaddik or a big rasha. There's no in between. You want to be in between? Cue Garden Hills. But in Eretz Yisrael, there are only extremes. Why? Because if you're doing mitzvahs, you're sanctified. God could stay there. God could stay there. Then you have holy fruits. You ingest the holy fruits. You become holier. God moves in more. God moves in more. The fruits are holier. You ingest them. You become holier. Hashem more. It's a never-ending cycle. But when you sin in Eretz Yisrael, So if you want to be a Rasha really bad, you got to go to the Holy Land. If you want to be a big tzaddik, you got to go to the Holy Land. That's what the Bach says. But you know why we daven? Ribbanu Shalaylam. We want to go to Eretz Yisrael and eat the fruits. That is the most elevated experience. In fact, the Chidah's grandfather, who's the Chidah's grandfather? The Chesed Avram. Chesed Avram has an amazing question. We know in the Midbar, Klal Yisrael, what did they eat? Carlos and Gabby. No. They ate man. They ate man. And yet, when they come to Eretz Yisrael, they don't have man. They don't have... Why? Why is it that in the Midbar, they had man? The Midbar is such a desolate place. It's not a sanctified place. And when they come into Eretz Yisrael, there's no man anymore. You would think if there's man in the Midbar, there's certainly man in Eretz Yisrael. No. Says Chesed Avram, listen to the following. The Midbar is a place of demons. It's a place of tumah. If God is going to give the Jewish people fruit in the desert, that fruit is created by tamei land, tamei soil. It's going to produce tamei fruit. Tamei fruit cannot contain Kedusha. So the Rebbe Shem has to send down containers from heaven to be able to contain holy particles that we ingest. But once we come to Eretz Yisrael, we don't need man. We have something better than man. We have holy containers. What are the holy containers? The fruits, the apples, the oranges. They're a holy receptacle which could contain Kedusha Sa'aretz, and you ingest it. Is a very elevated experience. In fact, listen to this. Says the Chassam Sofer, an amazing thing. We know that Eliyahu Hanavi comes to Achav. We're on the home stretch now. Eliyahu Hanavi comes to Achav. He says, Achav, you're a Rasha. There's not going to be any rain. And then a little while later, Eliyahu comes to Achav and he says, there will be rain, ki'im lefi dvari. The rain will fall when I say so, according to my words. Says the Chassam Sofer. Does anybody know where rain comes from? So we would say, yeah, of course, the clouds. Does anybody know where clouds come from? The mist, right? The sun shines on the ocean and it creates water vapor. The water vapor rises up and eventually turns into rain. Says the Chassam Sofer, no, that's not where rain comes from. You ever hear an expression when people talk and they're not saying anything? What is it called? Vapor. It's a lot of hot air. It's hot air. Says the Chassam Sofer, you know where rain comes from? People talking. When you talk, right? Feel it near your mouth. When you talk, it's hot. It's water vapor. Every word you say creates vapor that creates clouds. Now it depends what you talk about. If you learn Torah, you daven properly, it creates holy clouds. Clouds of Torah. Clouds of Tefillah. You speak Lashon Hara, you speak Dvarim B'Telem, Leit Sanos, by Chazar Hashatz, by Kaddish, then you create poisonous clouds. You create poisonous clouds. The rain is tamei rain. The rain falls down, it creates tamei fruit. You eat the fruits, it makes you go down. You go down, you say worse things. You say worse things, you make worse clouds. You make worse clouds, it makes bad rain. Worse rain, worse fruits. Worse fruits, you become a bigger Rasha. Says the Chassam Sofer, when people are not using their mouth for the right thing, it creates this, weather system, this vicious cycle of bad clouds, bad rain, poisonous fruits, causing people to do averos, and the Ribbanu Shalom has to do something about it. So what does God do about it? Drought. God brings a drought. You know why God brings a drought? He has to stop the cycle. Because if He doesn't stop the cycle, people are just going to be eating more of the fruits. They're going to become even worse. They're going to say worse things. They're going to cause worse clouds, worse rain, worse fruits, people worse and worse and worse. You see, it's happening. Until God has to make some kind of drought, rav. He stops the cycle. The people humble themselves and they start saying the right thing. They start speaking in the right way. Says the Chassam Sofer, if you want to know the state of the world, it's all in the fruits. If the fruits are holy, that means the people are doing the right thing. If the fruits are downgraded, that means the people are creating rotten fruit. So Eliyahu Hanavi goes to Achav. He says, Achav, God stopped the cycle. There was drought for a number of years. But now the rain will fall only according to my words. So you know what Eliyahu Navi does? He gathers all of Klal Yisrael. And what does all of Klal Yisrael say? 3 words. Hashem hu ha'alakim. Hashem hu ha'alakim. And if you look in the Navi, it says a cloud like a hand comes down over Klal Yisrael. So Chassam Sofer wants to know, where did this cloud come from? Why only over Klal Yisrael? Because Eliyahu had to create a good cloud. This good cloud was created by the tefillos of Klal Yisrael. And then the rain fell. It was a good rain. It was a rain created by their tshuva. And the cycle was able to start over. Says the Chassam Sofer, clouds, rain, fruits are the greatest barometer of the state of the world. And therefore, it's an amazing thing. If you look throughout Shas, Shas gives us one clear sign that Mashiach is coming. Do you know what indicator Shas gives us? That Mashiach is on its way. And even the Gemara says, this is the most recognizable sign that Mashiach is coming. You take a look in the Navi Yechezkel, take a look in number 26. The Navi Yechezkel, Parak Chavav, Pasuk Daled. It says the following. V'nosati gishmeichem, look at number 28. Yechezkel Lamed Vav Ches. V'yatem, Rebbeinu Shalom says, and you, Hare Yisrael. Hashem's talking to the mountains of Eretz Yisrael. Anpechem titenu. Let your branches give forth. Piryechem tisu. Let your fruit be proliferated. La'ami Yisrael. Ki kervu lavai. Because the Geula is coming. Says the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Tzadik Chetz. Tzadik Ches. Look at number 29. Rabbi Lezer v'Amar Rabbi Abba. Ein lecha kates megula mizeh. We have no greater sign of the Geula coming than what? Than what the Navi Yechezkel says, that when Eretz Yisrael produces fruits in abundance, that means the Geula is imminent. That's what the Gemara in Sanhedrin says. That, you want to know when Mashiach is coming? This sign, that sign, Chutzpah Yaske, we have many, many simanim. Says Shas, what is the clearest sign Geula is coming? The fruit. Why the fruit? Very pashut. Chassam Sofer says, where do fruits come from? Your words. Mashiach is going to come when we control ourselves from speaking Lashon Hara, Rechilos, Sinas Chinam. When you control what you say. You control what you say, the rains will be good, it will produce fruits in abundance. The proliferation of fruit in Eretz Yisrael is Ein Lecha Kates Megula Mizeh. Rashi says, when Eretz Yisrael produces fruit, and by the way, we hope this is what we're seeing today. Because this is Lamaisa, in reality, this is factually true. That never in history has Eretz Yisrael produced fruits the way it's producing today. And according to Gemara and Sanhedrin, Ein Lecha Kates Megula Yoser. Now we still have a lot of work to do. To be Zoicha to the level where the fruits are carrying Kedushas HaShchina. We have a lot to do to make sure the Shechina comes back to Eretz Yisrael. But the biggest siman of the impending, imminent Geula are the fruits. Why the fruits? Because the fruits are the barometer of the stage of Klal Yisrael. It shows us how we're talking. It shows us what we're doing in the Ba'aretz. And that is why Rabbi say, the Gemara Megillah says, right after the bracha of Barech Aleinu is what bracha in Shemana Esrei? Tekah b'shofar gadol chirusenu. What's the hemshech hadvarim? What's the connection? Says the Gemara Megillah, because since the pasuk in Yechezkel says that the proliferation of fruits were heralded in Tekah b'shofar gadol, heralded in the Geula. Why will it herald in the Geula? Because when we're careful with our dibur, we'll be able to produce good clouds, good rain, wonderful fruits, proliferation of fruits, to the point, Rabbi say, where the pasuk says in the Chukaisai, the Eitz Hasada Yitain Piryai. You know what that means, says Rashi? Nowadays, only fruit trees produce fruits. When Mashiach comes, even barren trees will produce fruits. Why? Because our words will be so pure. It will produce such wonderful clouds, such wonderful rain, such a proliferation of Kedusha. So says Rashi, Asidin Lasois Ilane Srak Perois. Even barren trees will produce fruit. So on Tu B'Shvat, when you hold up your fruit, you could offer a tefillah that we should be zoicha, that the Atam, Hare Yisrael Anpechem Titenu, we're Mispalel. The Rebbe Shalom should show us the Ein Lecha Kates Megula Mizeh. The greatest revelation, the greatest sign of the imminent Geula are the fruits of Eretz Yisrael. It's even greater than the man. The man was only a necessary substitute because we didn't have Kadosh fruits. But what's the greatest receptacle of Kedusha we have in this world? Peiros Haaretz. Peiros Haaretz. So we have the Schus, Tu B'Shvat. We Smalel, the Rebbe Shalom should bless us with a year of proliferation of Peiros Haaretz, and we should be Zoche to Gula Shlema Hervi Amenu. Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.